I'm going to deal tonight with the narrative that represented in part by that map. This is the Hamas map, by the way. So take it with a large, well, it's completely false. And the narrative is that there was this country called Palestine, and the colonial settler Jews invaded it and created an apartheid state, which separated Arabs, Muslims from Jews, and oppressed them. That's the narrative of the left. Well, let's begin with the term Palestine. It's not an Arab word. It's not Arabic. How many people know where the word Palestine comes from? Yeah, it's a word imposed on Judea and Samaria, which was the home of the Jews, by the Romans, because the Jews had the really bad judgment to revolt against the Roman Empire. And they were defeated, and 1 million Jews were slaughtered. And the Romans declared the region where the Jews had their homeland, they named it for their enemies, the Philistines. It refers to the plain of Philistia. So this tells you a number of things. The Jews, by the way, came to this land, Palestine, which was called then Judea and Samaria, in about 1000 BC or before. Jews have lived continuously there for 3,000 years. Jews are the indigenous people, to use a term favored by the left, of this region. The Arabs arrived 1,500 years later, in the 7th century. That's maybe more than 1,500 years. By conquest, they invaded this area, and they built a mosque on top of the holiest place in Judaism, the Temple of Solomon. That's why there's the Dome of the Rock is on, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is on top of the wall, which is the holiest site for Jews. And it's something that Islamists do. They take famous cathedrals, like the one in Constantinople, and they turn them into mosques. Or in Afghanistan, as you probably know, they blew up 2 2,500-year-old statues of the Buddha, because Islam is an imperialist religion. It's spread by the sword, and it believes in subordinating all other creeds. In 1948, well, here, this is a complete lie. There's never been a Palestinian state. There's never been a Palestinian entity in the Middle East. And there is no Palestinian people. It is a nationality that was invented in 1964 when the PLO was created by Nasser, who was the dictator of Egypt, and the KGB. And it was created in order, until that moment, the slogan of the Arab struggle against the Jews was push the Jews into the sea. And the KGB told the Arabs. This is not a very good slogan if you want to get support. You need to be for self-determination. So we'll say that the Palestinians are oppressed by the Jews. So this is completely false. The Palestine Symphony in 1947 was a Jewish symphony. Palestine, by the way, is a region, the plain of Philistina. It has the same sense or connotation as New England. I mean, there are New Englanders, but they're not a nationality. And in fact, Arabs share the same religion, the same language, same culture. And there was, of course, a pan-Arab movement. Self-determination is not at all, this is just a mask for an agenda, which is push the Jews into the sea. Part of the cynical, genocidal set of lies that inspires and organizes the so-called Palestinian movement is that the Jews occupy Arab land. I don't have a map of the Ottoman Empire, but this entire region and all the land that Israel was created on belonged to the Turks for 400 years prior to the creation of Israel. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Jordan were all created the same way Israel was, out of the ruins of the Turkish Empire. So the Turks had the bad judgment to side with the Germans in World War I. And when they were defeated, the victors, England and France, divided up their empire. But there never was a part of the empire that was called Palestine, or an entity in the empire that was called Palestinian. In 1948, when Israel was created, so there isn't an inch, not an inch, of Israel that belonged to Arabs. The Turks aren't Arabs, let alone to a fictional entity called Palestinian at this time. When Israel's independence occurred in 1948, on the day of its independence, Israel was attacked by 5 Arab dictatorships. And were defeated. The Arabs were defeated. Now here's why you should understand that self-determination for Palestinians is a complete myth. They don't believe in it, they don't want it. How do we know that? Well, when the war was over in 1948 and Israel was created, Jordan annexed the West Bank, which is sort of here, which is the historic homeland, by the way, of the Jews, Judea and Samaria. Jordan annexed the entire West Bank. And the Gaza Strip was annexed by Egypt, just disappeared from the map altogether. Not a peep out of the Arab world, let alone the so-called Palestinian world, to protest that. Today, if I had the map, the actual original Palestine mandate, this is only 20% of it, would come out to here and here. The 80% of the Palestinian mandate was given to Jordan. That's how Jordan was created. 70% of Jordanians are Arabs. And since they're from the region of Palestine, they're Palestinian Arabs. But there's no movement, and they're ruled by a Hashemite minority. But there's no movement to create a Palestinian state in Jordan. Why? Because the goal of the Palestinian movement is the destruction of the Jews. They're racists, used in a broad sense, which everybody uses today. They hate Jews because they're Jews. Not because they created, resentful that they created a powerful state and showed up all these Muslim-ruled countries in the Middle East. The Jews were a great boon to the Middle East if they had allowed them to have what they exist on 0.03% of the landmass of the Arab Middle East. Because the Jews were created, they created an industrial society. One of the reasons that Arabs came to this region was to get jobs. It was a boon to the area, but they declared war on the Jews. The Palestine Liberation Organization and the Palestinian nationality were invented in 1964, which is 16 years after the creation of the State of Israel. And you can look on the internet at the statement of the Palestinian, the original manifesto of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And there's no mention of Jordan, but 70% of the Arabs in Jordan being under the thumb of a Hashemite monarchy. It's only about the Zionist entity and how it has to be destroyed. Now, where did this movement to expel the Jews come from? Its leader was a man named Haj Amin al-Husseini. How many people know that name? You. Husseini was appointed the Mufti, spiritual leader of Jerusalem, by the British, actually by a British Jew, Lord Samuel, in 1921. He was a rabid Jew hater. He organized a massacre of the Jews in 1929, another one in 1936. He was a protege of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the fountainhead of Al-Qaeda and many other terrorist organizations. The Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna was his mentor, was the creator of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood translated Mein Kampf into Arabic in the 30s. It was a pro-Hitler organization. Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who is the father, he's the George Washington of the Palestinian movement. There's a national holiday in his honor. Husseini went to Berlin, where he recruited an Arab legion for Hitler. And he drew up his own plans for an Auschwitz in the Middle East to exterminate the Jews, which didn't succeed only because Montgomery defeated Rommel at Al Alamein. The Palestinian movement is a Nazi movement in the purest sense of that term. Its goal is the destruction of the state of Israel, the Jewish state, which is a genocide, and Hamas, which means the party of the Islamic resistance, is a creature of the Muslim Brotherhood. It was created by the Muslim Brotherhood. And it is the ruler of Gaza, but it's also in a true partnership, as they put it, with Fatah and the leaders of the West Bank. It is a Nazi movement. I brought it with me. Well, let me first quote from some of the leaders of the Brotherhood and of Hamas. The founder of Hamas, Mahmoud al-Zahar, said, "There is no place for you Jews among us, and you have no future among the nations of the world. You are headed to annihilation." the chairman of the Gaza parliament in 2007 said, "Be certain that America is on its way to disappear. Allah, take hold of the Jews and their allies. Allah, take hold of the Americans and their allies. Allah, count them and kill them to the last one, and don't even leave one." Yusuf al-Qaradawi is the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is what he had to say. "Throughout history, Allah has imposed upon the Jews on the people who would punish them for their corruption. The last punishment was carried out by Hitler. By means of all the things he did to them, even though he exaggerated this issue, he managed to put them in their place. This was divine punishment for them. Allah willing, the next time will be at the hands of the believers." And for those of you who think that Islam is parallel to Christianity and Judaism and other religions of the world, here is a saying by the Prophet Muhammad that is part of their holy writ. "The day of judgment," that's the day of redemption, "will only come when Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, when the Jews hide behind the rocks and the trees, and the rocks and the trees cry out, 'O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him.'" If you think that that is something that can, a saying of the Prophet that's obscure, it's in the Hamas charter. Hamas, all of you should go up, you can find it on the internet. Read the Hamas covenant. The day of judgment, well, it's in the covenant, kill all the Jews. The slogan of Hamas, this map, by the way, I'll get to the propaganda organizations for Hamas. Let me just read you some of the lunacy. First of all, it declares, the Hamas covenant declares that the Islamic movement is a religious movement. It believes the land of Palestine is an Islamic waqf, consecrated for future Muslim generations until Judgment Day. And no part of it must be given up. That's why they're against peace negotiations altogether. The Zionist invasion is a vicious invasion. It does not refrain from resorting to all methods, using all evil and contemptible ways to achieve its end. It relies greatly in its infiltrations and espionage operations on the secret organizations it gave rise to, such as the Freemasons, the Rotary, Lions clubs. I couldn't believe this myself when I was reading it, and other sabotage groups. All these organizations, whether secret or open, work in the interest of Zionism and according to its instructions. They aim at undermining societies, destroying values, corrupting consciences, deteriorating character, and annihilating Islam. It is behind the drug trade and alcoholism. This is worse than Mein Kampf. This is lunacy. And yet, on this campus, you have agents of Hamas spreading its propaganda. And that's a group that's organized a counter meeting just in honor of my visit, so nobody would have, or none of them would have to listen to this and try to deal with it. Students for Justice in Palestine. Students for Justice in Palestine is not about justice in Palestine. Women in Palestine are threatened with honor killings. Gays have been thrown off tall buildings. Tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars have been stolen from the people who live in Gaza by Hamas in order to build, it's money that was given by the United States and actually Israel as well, to help poor people. It was used to build, it's being used, and still is being used, to build tunnels so that terrorists can tunnel their way into Israel and blow up women and children in pizza parlors. The apartheid lie. I mean, these are just such bold-faced lies. There are over 1 million Muslims, Arab Muslims, living in Israel who have more rights as Israeli citizens than they have in any Muslim country, period. Muslims, Israeli Muslims, sit on the Supreme Court, they sit in the Congress, the Knesset. This Israel was an Arab. It's the only place in the Middle East where gay people can have a gay pride march without fear of their lives. It's the only country in the Middle East that isn't an apartheid state. Why is it called an apartheid state? Because that's a symbol of bringing down South Africa, the South African regime, and the goal here is to destroy the Jewish state. Pure and simple. I want to say one word, since Gaza is very much part of the cause of SJP. When you see the apartheid wall built on this campus, that's just Jew hatred. And you have community principles on this campus, and they're respected for every group but Jews. The KKK could not have an organization like SJP funded by your student funds, with offices undoubtedly in this building, on this campus. But SJP's is just the equivalent of the KKK, only exclusively directed against Jews. And they do. And they are big supporters of Hamas's war conducted from Gaza against the state of Israel. One thing that's always ignored by the left is the fact that there's been 70 years of unprovoked aggression, terrorist aggression. The first terrorists were actually, they were organized by Egypt in the Gaza Strip in 1949. As I said, the Gaza Strip at that time had been annexed by Egypt, and was until actually Israel liberated both. Why are there checkpoints? They're checkpoints because Palestinians go out to kill children. There were 1,000 Jews who were murdered by Palestinian terrorists until they put up the fence. It's actually a security fence, so only a small part of it is a wall. And that stopped it. In 2005, Israel made the mistake of offering a gesture for peace and withdrew its troops from Gaza. Why were Israeli troops in Gaza? Because Israel had been invaded 3 times by Egyptian armies through the Gaza Strip. That's why they were there. There were 7,500 or so Jews living in the Gaza Strip, which has 1.2 million people, others being Arab Muslims. Those 7,500 Jews, you guys can do the arithmetic, I'm sure. 7,500 Jews out of 1.2 million people accounted for 10 or 20% of the gross national product of Gaza. They were law-abiding, they were creative, they created a horticulture industry, they built greenhouses and irrigation systems, and they produced 10 or 20% of the gross national product of Gaza. If the Arabs weren't such racists, if they weren't such Jew haters, they would want to import Jews to build up their gross national product. It's not like it's a prosperous country. When Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip, it forcibly removed the Jews. A lot of the Jews didn't want to leave. Why? Because if they left them there, they would be killed. An American Jew, actually the publisher of U.S. News and World Report, raised $14 million to buy the greenhouses and the irrigation systems and give them to the Arabs as a gesture of peace. On the day the Israelis left, Hamas destroyed the greenhouses, destroyed the irrigation system, and started firing rockets into schoolyards in Sderot and other Israeli cities. And they fired something like 7,000 rockets before the Israelis responded. Can you imagine the United States allowing people in Canada to fire rockets into the United States? And this is treated by Students for Justice in Palestine and the entire left on this campus as some kind of an Israeli aggression against the citizens of Gaza. There is a great oppression of Palestinian Arabs in Gaza and the West Bank, but the oppression is by Hamas and the PLO. Students for Justice in Palestine doesn't care at all anything about the about the Arabs there. Instead, they spread Hitlerian lies. SJP is funded by and orchestrated by Hamas. Just because they don't set bombs on campus doesn't mean they're not terrorists. If you are familiar with, say, the Irish Republican Army, you will know that the IRA was the military arm and Sinn Féin was the political arm. And actually in Hamas, that covenant, that charter I was reading from, they praise the people who write the stories and spread the propaganda. Now, the Israeli government is worthy of criticism just like every other government. And what are governments? They're just people who create, people with power. So they have all the failings that human beings have, which all of you are old enough to be somewhat familiar with. It will increase over time. But what the political left does on this campus, what SJP does, is to repeat bold-faced, genocidal lies, such as Israel is an apartheid state, Israel occupies and Jews have stolen Arab land. By the way, this isn't even controversial. You can go up on Wikipedia, look at any of, and you can look up Palestine, see where the name is derived from. You can look at the Ottoman Empire. It lasted for 400 years until the end of the First World War. The Turks, as I say, are not Arabs. They're not Palestinians. American Indians have a greater claim on the United States than Arabs have on Israel. And it's only been about 250 odd years, I don't know the exact number, but something like that, since we arrived, or our ancestors did. Actually, it's so Orwellian. SJP has organized an event, as I say, to keep people from coming to this event, called Unity and Diversity. It's something about hate speech. against hate, whatever. This is a hate group, if you ever wanted to see a hate group. It exists only to attack Jews. It doesn't exist to defend Palestinians, because if it did, it would be concerned about the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being spent on terrorist activities instead of on helping the people there. Another thing is like the refugee situation. When the Arab armies invaded the state of Israel, they broadcast to the people to flee because they figured they're going to conquer and then you can come back to your homes. That's where a lot of the refugees came from. Maybe there were 600,000. There were 600,000 Jews who had to leave the Middle East because they were driven out after World War II. The largest, all those Jews have been resettled. None of the Arabs have been resettled. Partly because the other Arab states won't take them, but mainly because Hamas and the PLO want them in refugee camps for political reasons. So all these people suffer living in refugee camps for all these generations in order to serve what is basically a Nazi cause. The chant of SJP, which is a Hamas chant, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, the river is the Jordan River, the sea is the Mediterranean, from the river to the sea. It's a call for the destruction of the Jewish state, which is a genocidal call. And these groups are protected by the administration at this university. They're funded out of your funds, not that you have any choice in it. They never understood that. They just tax you. No, I guess I do understand. I started my political career on the left. My parents were communists. I was brought up, and I was at Columbia in the 50s and Berkeley in the 60s. I was a radical. A Marxist revolutionary is how I would have described myself. But I never would have dreamed of supporting Hamas the way the political left does today. It's an absolute disgrace. And it's transparent. It's so easy, to see the lies. Not an apartheid state, doesn't occupy any Arab land. And Palestine is the name the Romans gave to the Jewish homeland to punish them for their rebellion. Those are the realities. That's the big picture. And whenever Israel has withdrawn, as they withdrew from Gaza, it just invites, now they have a terrorist army on their border. They should never have withdrawn from Gaza. They should never have withdrawn as they have from I haven't entirely withdrawn, but from the West Bank. You can't make peace with people who want to kill you. It's really simple. It's really simple. If you go up, there's a website called Palestine Media Watch. You can see how they celebrate and fund terrorists. They name soccer teams and soccer stadiums after terrorists. They have celebrations of terrorists who bashed infants' brains out in front of their parents. It's an evil. This is not about two rights. This is about right and wrong. It's about evil. People have been oppressed, for those of you who are leftists, for thousands of years, but never in the history of mankind has a people, an oppressed people, or whatever, strapped bombs to its own children, told them to go out and blow up other children because they're Jews or whatever. And if they're lucky enough to be male, they're going to go to heaven and get 72 virgins. It's sick. This is a very, very sick culture. And the sickness pervades now the I actually am still shocked. Well, I'm not, because I understand what deludes leftists. And it's a it's a religious movement, and facts don't mean very much to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to have a Q&A on this side. I'm going to have the microphone and just walk up in a respectful manner and ask your question. If anyone has any questions.
Can't be no questions, huh? Challenges.
Thank you for coming, by the way. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to have you here on campus. So my question is, over the past year and a half or so, there's been this kind of resurgence or growing anti-Semitic movement in the right wing. In the right wing, do you think that's a threat, being that the right's generally historically been?
Do that again. I'm sorry. I once mentioned Sean Hannity was speaking to 1,500 people, and his phone went off. And he said to the crowd, "Say hello." It was his sister. That was pretty cool. Go ahead.
So in the right in the past year or two, we kind of had a resurgence of anti-Semitic movement or anti-Semitic inclinations. Do you think, with the right generally being the ally to Israel and Jewish people in the United States?
Anti-Semitism on the right?
Yeah. Do you think that resurgence is a
look,
threat?
There's always a fringe. The interesting thing is the left always likes to fight battles that were won 100 years ago. So we defeated the Nazis in World War II. How many Nazis can you name, American Nazis can you name, whose names are not Richard Spencer or David Duke? You can't. Am I wrong? No, you can't. How many Nazis do we have in Congress? How big is the Nazi Party? They hold a national convention or national demonstration. 500 people show up out of 330 million. The left invites people to get their heads cracked, to break the law and commit violent acts which could get them hurt, and they get tens of thousands to do it. I'm actually floored by the use by the left these days of white supremacy. I think anybody who describes America as a white supremacist country belongs in a mental institution. This is insanity. This is insanity. I mean, I grew up in the 50s where, black popular songs were covered by white singers, where you never, ever would see on television a black man kiss a white woman or vice versa. Where now advertisers, the most cowardly lions in our culture, don't want to lose one customer. I mean, the ads, thoroughly integrated. It's an amazing country. There is no country which has large minority populations that is as tolerant and inclusive as the United States of America. And that couldn't have happened. It couldn't have happened without white people embracing it. It struck me like during the election, there's Hillary going on. The left is driven now by what I call racism. Identity politics is racism. That's all it is. People, when I was a kid, what they taught us in kindergarten was, all people are equal regardless of race, color, or creed. That you judge people by their merits as individuals, not by their origins or their gender or sexual orientation. So here's Hillary runs a whole campaign that women are somehow oppressed. Look, there's always been problems between the sexes. It's just the way we're built. It's a big problem, and we have to try to overcome it. But oppressed, give me a break. How are they oppressed? Well, there's this gender wage gap. So women who make, who have the same skills as men, at the same time in the workforce, and the same everything, get paid, what did she say, 24 cents less on the dollar than a male. How many people are aware that in 1963, a male-dominated Congress passed the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act? 1963. So it's illegal if anybody is doing that. And as we know, the courts are quite liberal. They would certainly be willing to listen to a complaint if a woman was getting paid 24 cents on the dollar less for equal work. But I can show you in one sentence why it's a complete fabrication. If it were true, employers would fire all their male employees, hire females, and increase their profits 24%. It doesn't happen because it's a lie. And yet the Democratic Party, that's what they ran their campaign on. What's happened to this country in the last decades is just unbelievable. I hope there are some people in this room who still vote Democratic, but I don't see how. I mean, how can, never mind. All right, I don't know if I answered the question. Anybody else?
Sir, the hadith that you mentioned about Muhammad and what yes, is that a legitimate hadith?
Yes. The problem with Islam is it hasn't changed since the 7th century. That's a big problem. I've been confronted where I bring things like this up and say, well, Joshua killed all the Amalekites. Well, yeah, but there's no Amalekites around, and there's been an evolution in Judaism. You say the same thing about Christianity. People used to go out and conduct holy wars, jihads, for Christ. When's the last time that happened? So, it's still part of the canon. As I say, it's in the Hamas charter. Hamas is a Nazi organization. That's very important. It's a terrorist organization, but also it's a Nazi in the purest sense. They want to kill Jews, that's their purpose. And it has supporters on this campus who are funded by student fees, who violate every time they go out and do their propaganda the community rules of this campus, which is to respect other people, not to spew hatred. And they're very Orwellian. They hide behind being anti-hate.
You spoke about, over the last decade or so, how there's been a change in the United States in regards to globally with the UN and its treatment of Israel and its treatment.
The UN is a collection of kleptocracies, dictatorships, and terrorist regimes. Why we're in it is way beyond me. They just try to make us an ambassador Mugabe, this monster. It's one thing I held against Bush. I thought during the Iraq War he should have just organized a new UN of democracies. I can't believe there's no opposition here. Has everybody been done? Well, that's nice. Anyway. Well, go out and do something about it.
Through my trying to learn about this whole conflict and everything, I've come up upon something called the Palestinian right of return. So it's like, I guess they're Palestinians born outside the entire region, but they have somehow have some sort of like,
No, it's very simple. Remember what I said about the refugees? The Jews resettled all the refugees. The Arabs didn't settle anyone. And the reason is they're claiming 5 million refugees. Well, first of all, there were only 600,000, and most of them are dead. But at 5 million, if Israel had to take in 5 million Arab Muslims, hostile, because they've been brought up, you know, again, if you go up to Palestine Media Watch, you'll see, I mean, in the schools, they teach them to hate and want to kill Jews. That would be the end of Israel. So it's just another weapon in their, another arrow in their quiver. That's what the right of return is. Oh, thank you.